Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs, kicking off G-Day this Saturday afternoon. Want to dive into this roster, talk about a few different things. One, some storylines that we're going to be following for this Georgia program. But more importantly, I want to throw some bold predictions in there as well as some players that I think on Saturday afternoon really put a stamp on what they're going to mean for this Georgia program heading into 2024. Extremely excited to get into this one. Georgia spring game every single year is one that I just have circled on my calendar, not only because they're almost always the number one team in the country heading into the season the last couple of years, but more importantly, y'all know I cover the recruiting trail and we talk about these kids pretty much all year, and now we get the opportunity to see them in a Georgia uniform. It's going to be a really fun Saturday. Excited to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. A massive shout out to the Georgia Bulldog fans, whether we're talking this program on the recruiting trail, talking spring practice, the amount of support y'all shown the fellas over the last couple of weeks and months really does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And before we get into some storylines, I want to hit you guys with some of my bold predictions. And my first bold prediction on the offensive side of the football is Micah Morris is going to, emerge as a guy that's going to be hard to keep off the field for this Georgia offensive line. Many of y'all know I'm a Michigan fan. I'll come out and say it. This Georgia offensive line is going to be one of, if not the best offensive line in the country heading into 2024. And a guy like Micah Morris, love his film from 2023. He might not even be a starter for this Georgia program. When you look on the inside of this offensive line, Tate Ratledge, Dalen Fairchild, and then Jared Wilson on the inside, that is about as good of a three-man battery as you'll see on that inside of the offensive line across the country. And a guy like Micah Morris is a guy that I think starts for almost every single program across the country. And it kind of just highlights why this Georgia team is so special year in and year out. It's not only because of all the NFL talent, it's because of how deep this team is. I mean, Georgia could trot out a second offensive line and have that be better than most offensive lines in the country. You talk about winning games late November, December, January, where Georgia's used to winning these football games. A lot of it comes down to depth, especially along the line of scrimmage. Georgia certainly has that. Really interested to see where Micah Morris slots in and kind of where that position battle is on the inside, because you're looking at some absolute hammers on the inside. My next bold prediction, Colby Young going to emerge as that wide receiver one for Georgia. Now, you could tell me a few different names as Georgia's wide receiver one. I probably wouldn't argue, right? Dominic Lovett, wouldn't argue with that. Dylan Bell, would not argue with that. Colby Young, wouldn't argue with that. Now, why I am so high on Colby Young is you look at the past couple of years, Georgia has had some elite pass catches, right? Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers. They haven't necessarily had that elite boundary wide receiver. Colby Young can be that guy. And I think what's so exciting about Colby Young is he hasn't even scratched the surface of what he can be at the college football level. You go back to his time at Miami, you saw the flashes week in and week out. You never saw him put it together fully. I think partially the quarterback play at Miami was never that consistent. Now he's got one of, if not the best quarterback, in the country, throwing him the football and Carson Beck. You might see Colby Young really emerge as not only this Georgia Bulldogs wide receiver one, but one of the more dominant wide receivers in the country, because I think the talent and the potential is certainly there for a guy like Colby Young. Now, getting into some storylines, Carson Beck, 0 questions. I've been very vocal. If you ask me to draft a quarterback for my team heading into this college football season, my draft pick is probably going to be Carson Beck. I think he's a stud. I think he's a Heisman Trophy candidate. Now, you look at the wide receiver room, where I'm most interested is kind of seeing where these wide receivers fit in, and more importantly, how you use these wide receivers. One of the reasons why I'm so optimistic about this wide receiver room is it's a really well-balanced group. You have so many different guys that can do so many different things. A guy like Dominic Lovett, an elite separator in that short intermediate kind of route tree. You have a guy like Dylan Bell who just is good at pretty much everything on the football field, the definition of an offensive weapon. You have guys like London Humphreys, Arian Smith, who's having a great spring practice as your burners to stretch teams vertically. You have a guy in Colby Young who's your big boundary wide receiver that gives you that physical presence. Now you got a Chef and Mike Bobo, Carson Beck. How are we going to use all of these wide receivers? I think we're going to get a feel for it on Saturday afternoon. That's probably my biggest storyline. On the offensive line, there's no questions. The questions are, how do you fit all the puzzle pieces together? I mean, you have a guy like Monroe Freeling who I think can break out in 2024. Not sure if he starts. We already talked about a guy like Micah Morris. I think one of the, storylines that I'm following is, what does Tate Ratledge look like potentially playing center? Do we get him seeing snap? Do we get to see him snap the football at all? That's one of the storylines that I have. Outside of that, this Georgia offense, it's a lot of excitement. I don't have that many questions about this unit. Now, moving over to the defensive side of the football, we'll start it off with some bold predictions that we have. My first bold prediction, Damon Wilson emerges as the elite edge rusher for this Georgia Bulldog team heading into 2024. It's something that I have been critical of from this Georgia defense going back to 2023, where you look at all those elite Georgia defenses prior to 2023, you had those elite pass rushers, those game wreckers getting after the quarterback. You look at Georgia in 2023, it was a dominant defensive line, one of the best defensive lines in the country, but who were you pointing to as that game wrecker, that it's 3rd and 8, you're pinning your ears back to go get the quarterback? Who was doing it? You didn't really have that guy. I think Damon Wilson flashed it at times last year as a true freshman. I don't think he was physical enough against the run. So now you kind of get another year of development for a guy like Damon Wilson Jr. You get him a little bit more playing time. I think he can emerge as that guy. Another guy that y'all know I'm a huge fan of, Jalen Walker. Really interested to see how those two guys get utilized in this Georgia defense. Second bold prediction that I have, and this is by far not a shot at guys like Dalen Everett, at guys like Julian Humphrey. Ellis Robinson, the fourth, is going to be a cornerback that plays a lot for the Georgia Bulldogs. I can't tell you the last time I've been that impressed with a cornerback coming out of high school. I mean, he is an elite caliber athlete. Not many more juiced up athletes at that cornerback spot than a guy like Ellis Robinson, the fourth. And this is a guy that this cornerback room is loaded for the Georgia Bulldogs. I think he is a very special talent that I think is going to be able to play early for this Georgia program, especially when you're coming from IMG and you have, IMG is basically a college football program. And so Ellis Robinson, he's used to a lot of what spring practice, what fall camp's going to look like. You talk about having that transition period for true freshmen. I don't think you're going to see much of one from Ellis Robinson because he's coming from IMG. He's used to kind of that standard. He's a guy that, yes, it's a very good cornerback room for this Georgia program. Ellis Robinson, a guy that I think plays early. I think he shows it on Saturday. On the defensive line, I think you're just looking for who's stepping up. We got a laundry list of guys, whether it's Jamal Jarrett, whether it's Christian Miller, whether it's Jordan Hall, who are going to be the guys for this Georgia team on the inside of that defensive line. You have a really high floor with guys like Stackhouse and Brinson. You know that they are going to be extremely reliable kind of guys. Who's going to be the dominant NFL talent that we've seen with Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt? Who are going to be those kind of guys? Christian Miller, Jordan Hall, Jamal Jarrett. Those are some of the names that I'll be looking at. You look at the linebacker room. I can't wait to see these young pups play. Talk about Smell Munden Jr. not going to play nursing an injury. Don't need him to play. Know what he is. CJ Allen, certified dog. Raylan Wilson starts on almost every single college football program across the country besides Georgia. You have a guy in Chris Jones, Justin Williams. Well, Chris Jones, I think, still nursing that injury, so he's probably not going to play. But you talk about Cole, you talk about Justin Williams. I can't wait to see these linebackers operate. You're looking at the deepest and most talented linebacker room in the country. Fire me up for that. Then you look at the back end. I think the storylines that I'm following, few different guys, right? We talked about Ellis Robinson. I think he is special. You have a guy in KJ Bolden who I think there's some opportunity to get involved in that rotation at that safety position. Obviously, Malachi Stark's not going to play on Saturday. A lot of opportunity for a guy like KJ Bolden. Last guy I want to talk about, a guy that I think fits perfectly in terms of how Georgia wants to use that star position, Jonell Aguero. You talk about creating a star in a laboratory. I feel like that's Jonel Aguero. I think he fits that position perfectly. Right build, quick air, short area quicks that he has, the ability to tackle in the box. Really excited about Jonel Aguero. It's an important position in that Georgia defense. He's going to have my eyeballs on the defensive side of the football. And for Georgia, a lot of other programs that we talk spring games, you have so many questions about. Oh, do we know if we have a starting left tackle here? Do we have a serious problem at the cornerback spot? You look at this Georgia roster, top to bottom, zero questions. I think you're just more excited about what the young talent looks like and how good can this team be in 2024. You already know I picked them to win the national championship. I think they're the best team in the country heading into 2024. Now we're just going to see just about how good this Georgia team can be on Saturday afternoon. Fired up for it. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.